The camp went on and on, a city of canvas stitched together with noise. Catelyn Stark had ridden through war camps before, Robb's stern and hungry, the river lords full of old grievances and wet wool, but nothing like this. Here men roasted oxen as if it were a harvest feast. Armor shone. Songs rose and fell, catching in the cold salt air that rolled up from Shipbreaker Bay. Even the mud, churned thick under tens of thousands of boots, seemed an inconvenience the Reachmen wore like a joke. She felt out of place in it, a gray wolf among summer roses. Her cloak was damp at the hem and the smell of horse sweat clung to her gloves. The banners above her were all green stags and golden roses, the Baratheon crowned in stag's antlers. The Tyrell rose fat as a promise. She caught glimpses of Stormland's sigils too, swans and lightning, crowned skulls, towers and turtles. Lords who had once sworn to Robert and now shouted Renly's name with beer on their breath. A line of knights cantered past, bright as a painted September. One lifted a visor to grin at her, not recognizing her face but recognizing her rank. She could see it in the quick straightening of backs, the sudden quieting of a jest as word ran ahead. Stark, Stark, the Lady of Winterfell comes south in a time when wolves should stay in their snow. Lady Catelyn? A voice called. Brienne of Tarth stepped out from between pavilions like a moving wall. She looked too large for the world, her shoulders broad under plain steel, her face solemn and wind-chapped. There was no bright enamel on her, no gilded lion, no gilt rose, only the honest dullness of iron and the heavier dullness of vigilance. Catelyn had met her once, briefly, in the yard at Bitterbridge. She remembered the way men had laughed behind their hands then, and the way Brienne had borne it as if laughter were weather. "Brienne," Catelyn said, and was surprised by the relief in her own voice. Here was at least one person who did not seem drunk on spectacle. "I was told you were sworn to Renly Baratheon's guard." "I am," Brienne said, as if that were not a vow but an anchor driven into rock. She bowed stiffly. "His Grace is expecting you. His Grace." The words tasted wrong. Renly was Robert's youngest brother, handsome, charming, lavish. He was not, by law, king. And yet all around her men spoke the title as if they had spoken it all their lives and could not imagine any other sound. As Brienne led her deeper, Catelyn glimpsed the heart of the camp. Renly's great pavilion, a green mountain of silk with golden cords. Men milled around it like bees around a flower. Loras Tyrell stood near the entrance, helmless, his dark hair loose and damp from the mist. He was as beautiful as the songs insisted, but there was a hard edge under it now, a soldier's impatience. When his eyes found Brienne, something softened, only a fraction, only for a heartbeat. "Lady Stark," Loras said to Catelyn, and bowed with courtly grace. "You are welcome, welcome." That too was a strange word in a war camp, but it was the Reach's genius, to turn war into pageant until men forgot the blood beneath their boots. Inside the pavilion, warmth struck her face, the heat of braziers and the closeness of bodies. Renly Baratheon stood near a table strewn with maps, laughing at something Mace Tyrell was saying. He wore green velvet slashed with gold, and a stag antler crown that looked made for tourneys rather than thrones. Marjorie Tyrell stood beside him, slim and composed, her hands folded, her gaze bright as a blade hidden in silk. Renly turned as Catelyn entered, and his smile widened, easy as summer. "Lady Stark," he said, "how good of the North to remember we are all one realm." Catelyn thought of Winterfell, of Bran's broken legs, of the letters Robb wrote in a boy's fierce hand. "I have not come to speak of remembrance," she said, and stepped into the warmth with cold still in her bones. "I have come to speak of peace, if any can still be found." Renly's eyes glittered. "Peace," he repeated, as if savoring the word like wine. "Ah, then you have come to the right tent. My brother Stannis is outside with his righteous scowl and his red witch. Bring him in, Lady Stark. Let us see if peace can survive his company." They met in a smaller tent pitched between the camps. As if canvas could keep brother from brother, the way stone could keep storm from shore. Catelyn stood with her hands empty and her heart full, and watched the space between Renly Baratheon and Stannis Baratheon thicken like ice forming on a river. Stannis looked carved from bitterness. His jaw was clenched. The iron crown sat on his head as if it had grown there, a thing of harsh lines and no softness. He wore dark mail and boiled leather, no bright color, as if he were mourning even in victory. Renly wore green and gold as if he were celebrating the day before battle. He did not look like a man who feared his brother's anger. He looked like a man amused by it. "I will not kneel to you," Renly said lightly, as if he were refusing a second cup at supper. "It seems a pity to begin our talk with a lie." "You are no king," Stannis said. The words snapped out, raw as the crack of a whip. "You have no right. Robert was king. I am his heir." "Robert was king," Renly agreed, and for a moment his smile faded enough to show the steel under it. "And Robert's son sits the Iron Throne." Stannis's mouth twisted. "A bastard born of incest." Catelyn saw Melisandre of Ashai's eyes flicker then, a small movement like a flame catching. She stood at Stannis's shoulder in red that seemed too vivid for the gray day, her hair dark and loose, her skin pale as milk. The ruby at her throat pulsed with its own inner light, a heartbeat that did not belong to any living thing. "The realm will not care what is true," Renly said. "The realm cares what it can stomach. Joffrey has the throne and I have the swords. Between us, brother, I think the realm will choose the more pleasant meal." "You would set yourself above the law because you are pleasant?" Stannis's contempt was almost physical. "You are a boy playing at crowns." "A boy?" Renly laughed softly. "I am 2 years your junior. If that makes me a boy, you are not old enough to be king either." Catelyn lifted a hand, before the anger could turn into steel and steel into blood. "My lords," she said, forcing her voice steady, "you are brothers. The enemy sits in King's Landing. House Lannister bleeds the realm dry, while you quarrel. My son fights alone in the Riverlands, and men die for pride." "My pride," Stannis said. "He would steal my birthright." Renly's eyes slid to Catelyn, and for an instant she saw calculation there, quick and cold. Then the charm returned, like a curtain dropped to hide the window. "If Stannis wants my knees, he may have them," Renly said, "provided he brings a stool. It is hard to kneel while wearing a crown." "Take it off," Stannis growled. "Take it off and do your duty." "And what duty is that?" Renly asked, voice light again. "To follow a man who inspires loyalty the way a tax inspires gratitude?" Stannis's hand tightened on the hilt at his belt. Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, shifted behind him, his weathered face set. In worried lines, Brienne of Tarth stood behind Renly, rigid as a spear, watching Stannis as if watching a viper. Catelyn looked to Melisandre. "Lady," she said carefully, "you counsel Stannis Baratheon. Tell him there is another way." Melisandre's lips parted slightly. Her gaze was not on Catelyn, nor on Renly, nor even on Stannis. For a heartbeat it seemed fixed on something beyond the tent wall, beyond the surf and the mist and the world itself. When she spoke, her voice was low, intimate, the sound of embers shifting. "2 stags," she murmured. "One crowned by laughter, one crowned by iron. The realm bleeds beneath them both." Stannis's eyes cut to her. "Say what you see." Melisandre's ruby glowed brighter, as if fed by the question. She seemed to inhale the damp air and taste it. "In the flames," she said, "I saw a lion old and cold. His roar commands men. His gold buys them. His fear shapes them. While he lives, the false king lives." Renly's smile sharpened. "Tywin Lannister," he said. "Now there is a man worth hating." Stannis did not smile. "A lion is not my brother." "No," Melisandre said softly, and her eyes returned at last to Stannis's face. "And so the gods may allow what they would forbid between blood." Catelyn felt the hairs on her arms rise, though the tent was warm. Something moved in the air, unseen. Promise, a threat. Stannis stared at Melisandre as if seeing her anew, as if her red silk were not cloth but smoke. "What would you have me do?" he asked, and the question sounded like a stone dropped into deep water. Melisandre's gaze held his. "What you were made to do," she said. "Cut away the rot. Let the realm breathe." Renly barked a laugh. "If your red woman means to murder Tywin Lannister with a look, she may go ahead. I will not stop her. Meanwhile, brother, I will take King's Landing the old-fashioned way, with men." Stannis' eyes never left Melisandre. "You speak of a lion," he said, "but the stag still stands in my path." "The stag stands in the open," Melisandre replied. "The lion hides behind walls of gold and fear. Strike the lion and the walls fall. The stag will bow when the realm calls for one king." Renly's mouth opened, perhaps to mock, perhaps to rage. Catelyn did not know. She only knew the air had turned heavy, as if the tent were filling with smoke no one else could see. "I have heard enough," Renly said, and his voice was suddenly hard. "Stannis, you may have my love if you had ever wanted it. You will not have my crown." Stannis' eyes narrowed. "Then you choose treason." "I choose the realm," Renly said, "and the realm chooses me." He turned and strode out, his cloak flaring green behind him. Brienne followed like a shadow made of steel. Left behind, Stannis stood very still. Davos watched him, wary. Melisandre's ruby glowed and dimmed, like a heart learning a new rhythm. Catelyn realized then that the parley had not ended in peace. It had ended in a different kind of decision. Stannis did not move for a long time after Renly left. He stood as if he had been nailed to the earth, his shoulders rigid, his mouth a thin line. Catelyn waited, not daring to break the silence. And in that waiting she heard the sea, steady and endless, battering the rocks below Storm's End. A reminder. The world did not pause for brother's pride. At last Stannis spoke, his voice low. "You heard him." "I did," Catelyn said. "And I heard you. This cannot end well." "It will end as it must," Stannis said. "The law is not a song to be sung when men are pleased. It is iron. It is the only thing that holds the realm together." Davos Seaworth shifted, as if the words hurt him. "Your Grace," he said, careful. "There are other ways. Ships, men, steel. We." Melisandre's hand lifted, and he fell silent. She did not touch him. She did not need to. "You would have me kill my brother," Stannis said, and his eyes pinned Melisandre like a blade. The anger there was fierce, but behind it Catelyn saw something else. Fear. Not of Renly, but of what killing Renly would make of him. Melisandre's expression did not change. "I would have you save your kingdom," she said. "If your brother stands in the way of that." "He is my brother," Stannis snapped. "Blood. The Lord of Light hates darkness," she replied, and her voice did not rise. "He hates lies. He hates the false king's throne. You asked what I saw. I told you. The lion feeds the darkness. The lion's death would spill fear through the realm like ink in water." Stannis' fingers curled into a fist. "What would you have me do?" he asked, and the question sounded like a stone dropped into deep water. Melisandre's gaze held his. "What you were made to do," she said. "Cut away the rot. Let the realm breathe." Catelyn's throat tightened. "Tywin Lannister," she said, and tasted the name like ash. "He is in the Riverlands." "He is in Harrenhal," Melisandre said, and the certainty in her tone made Catelyn's skin prickle. "He sits in a ruined hall and thinks himself safe. He thinks there are always walls between him and consequence. He is wrong." Stannis' eyes narrowed. "And you can reach him?" Melisandre's ruby flared. In its light her eyes looked darker, deeper, as if they held their own fire behind them. "Yes," she said, "but it will not be as it was. The distance is greater. The cost will be greater." Davos's voice came out rough. "Cost?" he echoed. "What cost?" Melisandre's gaze flicked to him, and Catelyn saw the faintest hint of disdain, as if he were a child asking why the tide rose. The fire must be fed, she said. A shadow cannot be cast without a source. A shadow is born from light. Stannis's jaw worked. I am the source, he said. You are the king, she replied. You are the flame. Catelyn could not keep the horror from her voice. And what of Renly? Will you allow him to live? Stannis's eyes cut to her. For a moment, the rigid law in him wavered under something painfully human. He will not bend, he said. He will not stop. And yet, Melisandre murmured, if the lion dies, the realm will look for strength. It will look for certainty. It will look for a king who does not laugh while men starve. Stannis stared at the map until Catelyn thought he might burn a hole through it with his eyes. Then he said, in a voice that sounded older than he had an hour before, prepare the ships. Davos swallowed. Your grace. Prepare them, Stannis repeated. And you, he said to Melisandre, you will show me this lion's death. Melisandre inclined her head, as if accepting a gift. As you command. Catelyn felt then that the parley's true outcome was not Renly's refusal, nor Stannis's anger. It was that Stannis Baratheon had chosen a different darkness to walk through. Morning came gray and salt-heavy, and with it Renly Baratheon's patience sharpened into purpose. The laughter of the night before died away as men buckled armor and tightened girths. The camp had always looked like a festival, but now it looked like what it was, a blade made of bodies. Catelyn watched from a slight rise as Renly rode to the gatehouse of Storm's End. The castle loomed above him, ancient and stubborn, its walls curved as if defying the very idea of siege. Storm's End had been built to spit in the face of storms. It could spit in the face of brothers too. Sir Courtenay, Renly called, his voice carrying up through mist. Open your gates. I have come home. Penrose's reply came after a pause that felt like the space between breaths. You are Lord of Storm's End, he said at last. The words were heavy, reluctant. That is true, but you come wearing a crown that is not yours by right. Renly smiled, and in it was all his charm and all his arrogance. Right is a word men use when they have no swords, he called back. I have swords enough to fill your yard twice over, but I have not come to threaten you. I have come to save you from my brother. There was movement behind Penrose, men shifting, glancing. Catelyn imagined their fear of Stannis, and of the Red Woman beside him. Fear could make walls crumble faster than rams. Stannis Baratheon will be king, Penrose said, the stubbornness flaring again. He is Robert's heir. And I am Robert's brother too, Renly replied. And I am standing here in the rain, asking you to be sensible. You can die for Stannis, sire, or you can live for Storm's End. Penrose's mouth tightened. And what of Edric Storm? At the mention, a small figure appeared in the shadows of the gate, dark-haired, pale-faced, a boy with the Baratheon look and a bastard's unease. Edric Storm had been a child in Renly's halls, a living reminder of Robert's appetites. In the wrong hands, he was more than a reminder. Renly's gaze dropped to the boy and softened. Edric will come with me, he said, and there was a flicker of something almost kind in his tone. He will not be used as a weapon in a brother's quarrel. Catelyn saw Penrose hesitate. It was not surrender that tugged at him. It was duty. Duty to the boy, duty to the castle, duty to the people who would starve if a siege tightened. What guarantee have I? Penrose demanded. Renly lifted a hand, palm open. My word, he said. Then he glanced back, and his eyes met Brienne of Tarth's. And hers. Brienne swore to defend me. I swear now that Edric Storm will not be harmed. I will send him away from the war to safety. Brienne's voice carried up, deep and firm. I will see it done, she said. The simplicity of the vow made it heavier than any oath sung in Sept. Penrose looked from Renly's smiling confidence to Brienne's iron earnestness. The wind howled, pushing mist through the arrow slits. Somewhere in the castle a child cried. At last, with a visible echo, Penrose bowed his head. Then I yield Storm's End to its lord, he said. The words rolled over the assembled host like the first crack of thunder. Chains rattled. The portcullis groaned upward. The gates opened, slow as reluctance, and Renly Baratheon rode beneath the arch as if it had been built for him alone. Catelyn watched him disappear into the shadow of stone, and could not shake the thought that while one gate had opened, another somewhere had begun to close. Dragonstone was not a place that welcomed men. It endured them. Stannis Baratheon returned to it as the day died. His ships cutting through dark water, their sails black against a bruised sky. The stone docks were slick with rain and sea spray. Torches hissed and spat. Above, the fortress rose in jagged black silhouettes. Its towers clawed and twisted as if dragons had died mid-flight and turned to stone. Davos Seaworth stepped onto the dock behind his king, the familiar smell of brine grounding him. He had loved the sea once. Now, when he looked at the water, he saw only the way it swallowed men without caring whose banners they had carried. Stannis did not pause to take in his home. He moved like a man driven by a thought that burned. Melisandre of Ashai glided beside him, her red robes a living flame against the wet darkness. Men turned their faces away as she passed, as if afraid her gaze could catch and consume them. In the great hall, the air smelled of damp stone and old smoke. The carved dragons that coiled around pillars seemed to watch with empty eyes. Stannis strode past them, through corridors where the wind moaned like a distant beast, until he reached the chamber where the map table waited. It was there, Westeros carved and painted, the realm reduced to wood and ink. A man could conquer it with a fingertip, if only the world obeyed tables. Stannis stood over Harrenhal's mark, a black ruin on the Riverrun's edge, and stared until Davos felt the silence press on his chest. "You saw him," Stannis said at last, without turning, "laughing at law, laughing at me." "He is your brother," Davos said, and hated himself for how small the words sounded in Dragonstone's vast cold. Stannis's head snapped slightly, the motion sharp. "He is a traitor," he said. "He is a boy who would steal what he did not earn." Melisandre's voice slipped in like smoke. "He is also a man who believes himself safe," she murmured. "As Tywin Lannister believes himself safe." At the name, Stannis's shoulders tightened. "Tywin," he said, as if testing the shape of it. "He commands the war in the Riverlands." "He commands more than war," Melisandre said. She stepped closer to the table, her ruby casting a faint red sheen over the carved rivers. "He commands fear. He commands gold. When he speaks, men obey because they believe he will outlast them." Davos could not stay silent. "And you would kill him with," he swallowed, "with sorcery." Melisandre's eyes turned toward him, and he felt suddenly as if he stood naked in the rain. "Would you rather kill him with 10,000 dead men?" she asked softly. "Would you rather spill the small folk's blood until the river runs red enough to satisfy your conscience?" Davos's hands curled, rough fingers flexing. "I would rather the realm not be damned," he said hoarsely. Stannis's voice cut through them both. "If Tywin Lannister dies," he said, "King's Landing is a candle without a wick. And Renly Baratheon?" Davos asked because he had to, because if he did not ask, the answer would go unspoken and grow larger in the dark. Stannis's mouth twisted. "Renly will still be there," he said. "He will still have his roses and his fools and his bright armor. But he will be alone, in a way he does not understand." Melisandre's smile was faint. "Once the lion is burned away," she whispered, "the realm will turn to the rightful king." Davos stared at Stannis's face, at the hard lines carved by years of resentment and duty. "And what will it take?" he asked quietly. Stannis did not answer at once. When he did, his voice sounded like stone grinding stone. "Whatever it takes." Melisandre's ruby pulsed, as if agreeing. Outside, the wind battered Dragonstone's walls. Somewhere deep in the fortress, a door creaked in a draft, and the sound was like an old bone cracking. They went down, deeper than any place a castle ought to have. Dragonstone had been raised by dragon lords, and its bones remembered fire. The stair narrowed, slick beneath their boots, the air growing warmer, thicker, scented with sulfur and old soot. Davos felt as if he were walking into a throat. Melisandre led them without hesitation, her steps sure. Her red robes brushed stone. The ruby at her throat caught what little light there was and scattered it, a dark chamber's imitation of sunrise. The room she brought them to was carved from black rock. Dragons writhed along the walls in raised relief, their mouths open, their wings spread, their eyes hollow. Black candles dripped wax like tears. In the center, a brazier glowed with coals, breathing heat into the damp air. Stannis stopped at the threshold. In the red pulse of the ruby, his face looked carved, not quite human. "This is where you do it," he said. "This is where fire is closest," Melisandre replied. Davos's mouth was dry. "Your Grace," he said, and the words scraped. There are other ways. You have ships, men. You could strike King's Landing before Tywin Lannister." "Before Tywin Lannister comes?" Stannis finished, and his lips curled with something like bitter amusement. "As if I have not thought of that. As if I do not know that lions have long legs." Melisandre moved around the brazier, her hands hovering over the coals without fear of the heat. "Tywin Lannister will come," she said. "He will bring his armies. He will bring the Riverlord's fear on a leash. He will buy what he cannot bully. He will do what he always does." "And if he is dead?" Stannis asked. Melisandre's eyes lifted. "Then others must decide for themselves," she whispered. "And most men are poor at deciding when no one terrifies them into obedience." Davos felt suddenly sick. "It is still murder," he said. Melisandre's gaze slid to him again. "War is murder with banners," she said softly. "You have served smugglers and kings. Do not pretend your hands are clean because the blood was spilled with steel." Davos's hand tightened on the charm he wore under his shirt, a small seven-pointed star carved from wood. He had taken it from a sept once, to soothe a wife who prayed. He clung to it now as if it were a rope thrown into deep water. Stannis stepped fully into the chamber. The heat from the brazier kissed his face. For a moment he looked like a man before a forge, ready to be hammered into something else. "What do you need?" he asked. Melisandre's lips curved. "Only you," she said. "Only your fire." Davos could not watch what followed with any comfort. There were no obscene sounds, no crude display. The act was intimate in a way that made it worse. A king giving something of himself not to a woman, but to a purpose. Melisandre spoke in a language Davos did not know, soft syllables that fell like ash. The ruby at her throat brightened until the chamber glowed red. Stannis's breathing grew heavy. Sweat shone on his brow. The coals in the brazier flared, and Davos thought he saw shapes in the flames. Claws, teeth, a lion's mane flickering for a heartbeat, then gone. Melisandre leaned close to Stannis's ear, her voice too low to hear. Stannis's eyes closed, his jaw clenched. When his eyes opened again, they looked hollowed, as if something had been taken. Davos stepped forward instinctively, as if to catch him, but stopped himself. He did not know what a man could touch in such a room without being burned. The air thickened. The darkness in the corners seemed to gather itself, like cloth being drawn tight. The dragons on the walls appeared to ripple in the red light. Melisandre straightened, her hands lifted. "Now," she whispered, and the word was not a command but an opening. Something moved beside the brazier, something darker than the darkness around it. Davos's heart hammered. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream. He wanted to deny what his eyes were seeing. But Stannis stood there, rigid, and Davos stayed because he had sworn and because there was nowhere in Dragonstone deep enough to hide from what had been called. It came out of nothing like a breath made solid. At first Davos thought it was only smoke, twisting up from the brazier in a shape his fear invented. But then it stepped forward, and the room seemed to shrink around it. The black candles guttered as if something had sucked the air from the flame. The shadow was a man and not a man, tall and lean, its edges not sharp but wavering, as if it could not decide where it ended and the world began. It wore no armor, but Davos could not tell if it wore anything at all. Darkness clung to it like a second skin. Its head turned slightly, and in the curve of its cheek, in the line of its jaw, Davos saw a suggestion of Stannis Baratheon, like a reflection in Blackwater. Stannis made a sound that might have been a groan or a gasp. He swayed. His face had gone gray, as if all the blood had been drained from it. For the first time since Davos had known him, Stannis looked old. Old in a way that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with depletion. Melisandre did not look old. She looked radiant, lit from within by the ruby's glow. Her hair clung damply to her cheeks, but her eyes were bright, fever-bright, and her lips moved in a whisper that threaded through the chamber like a spell cast on breath. "Go," she said. The shadow turned, and Davos felt its attention slide over him. There were no eyes he could see, no pupils to meet, but he knew. He had been noticed. His stomach clenched. His hand flew to his charm, and the wood dug into his palm. The shadow walked toward the wall. Not the door. The wall. Davos opened his mouth, but no words came. The thing reached out, and its hand, if it was a hand, pressed into stone as if stone were water. The black rock rippled around it. The shadow stepped forward again, and half its body vanished into the wall. "Your Grace," Davos forced out, his voice cracking. "Stannis." Stannis did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the place where the shadow was disappearing, and in them Davos saw something like grief, sharp and sudden, as if Stannis had not expected the cost to be so immediate. Melisandre's whisper became a chant, soft and relentless. The ruby pulsed faster, like a heart in a moment of panic. Davos could not tell if she was guiding the shadow or feeding it. The shadow vanished completely, swallowed by stone. For a heartbeat, the room was only rock and flame and men trembling in the aftermath of magic. Then the air moved, as if the chamber exhaled. Stannis's knees buckled. Davos surged forward, forgetting fear, and caught him under the arm. Stannis's body felt heavy, too heavy, as if the man's bones had been filled with lead. "Let go," Stannis rasped automatically, pride clinging even as his strength failed. "Not a chance," Davos muttered and held tighter. Stannis's skin was cold. His breath came shallow. Sweat beaded on his temple like dew on stone. Melisandre lowered her arms slowly, like a woman finishing a prayer. She looked satisfied. "It is done," she said, and the words were calm. Davos stared at her. "Done?" he croaked. "What have you done?" "I have sent the Lord of Light's justice," Melisandre said, "to Harrenhal, to Tywin Lannister." Stannis's head lifted slightly at the name, as if the thought of the lion kept him upright. His mouth opened. For a moment Davos thought he might say Renly's name, might speak of brothers and law and regret, but he did not. He said only, "He will die." Davos looked at the wall where the shadow had gone, and felt the weight of it traveling across the realm, across rivers and roads and sleeping villages. He imagined it sliding under doors, through cracks, through the seams of tents and the gaps between armor plates. He imagined it reaching Tywin Lannister's throat, and he wondered what would be left of Stannis Baratheon when the shadow returned, if shadows ever returned at all. It did not walk as men walked because it did not belong to the world that measured distance in miles and time in hours. It moved as darkness moved, swift where it wished, slow where it savored. The night swallowed it whole, and still it seemed darker than the night, an absence dragging itself across the land. Passed over water without splash or ripple. It slid along a ship's deck like a stain, unnoticed by sailors who huddled in cloaks against rain. It moved through pine forests that whispered under the wind, and the branches did not brush it. Wolves in the far distance lifted their heads and went still, their ears straining toward a soundless wrongness. In villages, dogs whimpered in their sleep. In lonely farmhouses, candles sputtered for no reason. A woman waking beside her husband felt suddenly cold and pulled her blanket tighter, never knowing why. The shadow crossed the Blackwater far inland. where the river widened and slowed. Mist lay on the surface like a shroud. It flowed through the fog and made the fog seem thin. A patrol of Lannister men rode along the bank, their red cloaks darkened by rain, their helms low over their brows. They spoke of bread and whores and the next town to loot. One man paused, frowning, as if he had sensed something. Then he spat, cursed the damp, and rode on. Harrenhal rose out of the riverlands like a nightmare made of stone. Even in ruin it was too large, too monstrous. Its towers melted and misshapen, black against the gray sky. Torches burned along its walls, small and feeble, like fireflies trying to hold back a storm. Inside, men drilled in courtyards, their boots slapping puddles. Horses stamped in stables, breath steaming. The smell of wet straw and smoke clung to everything. Lannister banners hung heavy with rain, the lion sagging, its gold thread dulled by damp. Tywin Lannister had chosen Harrenhal not because it was comfortable, but because it was intimidating. A ruin could still speak of power. It told the river lords, "This is what becomes of those who defy Dragonfire." It told the small folk, "Your castles are nothing." It told his own men, "Fear is a weapon that never dulls." The shadow slipped through Harrenhal's gate as if the iron portcullis were mist. It flowed past guards whose eyes stared straight ahead, who would later swear they saw nothing but rain. It moved through corridors where the stone was slick, where the draft moaned through cracks like a distant scream. Somewhere in the castle, a man laughed. Somewhere else, a woman sobbed. Somewhere, a raven croaked in its cage. The shadow did not care. It went where it had been sent, guided by hunger and by the faint imprint of a man's will. Tywin Lannister's chambers were high in one of the less ruined towers, because even a lion understood that the higher you climbed, the fewer throats could reach you. A fire burned in the hearth, smoky and sullen. Maps lay on a table beside a decanter of wine. A suit of armor stood in the corner like Aes. Island guard, its helm shaped into a snarling lion. Outside the door, two men stood watch. They were veterans, hard-faced, their eyes scanning the corridor with practiced suspicion. They were afraid of assassins with daggers. They were afraid of poison in wine. They were not afraid of the dark. The shadow slid up to them. Their breath caught, not because they saw it, but because their bodies sensed something their minds could not name. One opened his mouth to speak. No sound came out. The shadow passed through them like cold smoke, and their eyes widened in sudden, inexplicable terror. Then it was inside. Tywin Lannister sat at the table, bent over the map, a quill in his hand. His hair was thin and pale, his face sharp as a blade honed on pride. He was speaking low to Kevan Lannister, who stood beside him with a soldier's posture and a younger man's worry. "Robb Stark will attempt to draw us west again," Tywin was saying. "He will think to." He stopped. Kevan frowned. "Brother." Tywin's head lifted slowly. His eyes moved to the corner of the room, to the place where the fire's light did not reach. The shadow was there. For the first time in years, Tywin Lannister's face changed. It was not panic. Tywin did not do panic. But there was something like surprise, sharp and unwelcome. "What is this?" he demanded. And the command in his voice was a thing that had broken men. The shadow did not answer. It stepped forward. Kevan's hand went to his sword, steel rasping from leather. He moved fast, faster than most men his age, but the room itself seemed to slow, as if the air had thickened into syrup. Tywin rose. He did not scramble. He did not stumble. He stood as if standing could make him taller than fear. His fingers tightened on the quill until it snapped in his grip, the ink spilling like a wound across the map. "Name yourself," Tywin said, as if names could bind whatever this was. The shadow's head tilted slightly, and in its movement Kevan saw something that chilled him more than its unnatural presence. A familiarity, a line in the jaw, a shape to the brow, as if the darkness had borrowed a man's face. Kevan's mind supplied it before his mouth could. "Stannis Baratheon," he breathed, and the name came out like a curse. Tywin's eyes narrowed. "No," he said, and the denial was stubborn, almost offended. "He is on Dragonstone." The shadow moved again. It did not rush. It did not need to. Each step ate the space between them. Kevan lunged, sword thrusting toward the darkness. The blade passed through as if through smoke. No resistance. No flesh. Kevan's stomach dropped. He stumbled forward, overbalanced, and the shadow slid past his arm like a lover slipping away. Tywin's hand went to the dagger at his belt. He drew it in one smooth motion. The firelight caught the edge, bright as a promise. The shadow reached him. There was no dramatic struggle, no clash of steel. The shadow's hand closed around Tywin's throat, and the room seemed to darken as if the fire itself had flinched. Tywin's eyes widened, not with terror, but with a fierce, furious disbelief. Kevan grabbed at the shadow, his hands passing through cold emptiness. He shouted, a raw sound, and the guards outside finally reacted, their boots pounding toward the door. Tywin's mouth opened. He tried to speak, perhaps to command, perhaps to curse. No sound came. The shadow tightened. Tywin Lannister's face reddened. His jaw clenched, stubborn even in suffocation. His dagger arm jerked up, slashing blindly. The blade cut nothing. The shadow was not a body, and yet it was killing him all the same. Kevan's voice cracked. "Help!" he roared toward the door. The guards burst in, swords out, eyes wide. They froze as if the sight itself struck them dumb. One crossed himself instinctively, though there were no septons here, only men who had killed for coin and lion and fear. "Strike it!" Kevan bellowed. They swung. Steel whooshed through air. The shadow did not bleed. It did not flinch. The blades passed through and found only smoke and cold. One man's sword struck the table, splitting oak. The map of the realm shuddered. Tywin's knees buckled. He tried to stay upright. He always stayed upright, but the shadow did not care for pride. It tightened once more, and Tywin's body sagged, his dagger dropping from limp fingers to clatter on stone. For a heartbeat, in the fire's flicker, Kevan thought he saw us. Omething in Tywin's eyes. Rage, yes, and disbelief, yes, but also a dimming, a realization settling like ash. There were kinds of power gold could not buy. Tywin's head lolled. His mouth hung open. The air rushed into the room as if it had been held back. The shadow released him, and Tywin Lannister collapsed to the floor in a heap of cloth and bone. Silence struck, sudden and brutal. Kevan dropped to his knees beside his brother. He pressed fingers to Tywin's neck. Skin cold. "No pulse." "No," Kevan whispered, and the word was smaller than all the armies Tywin had commanded. The shadow stood over them, motionless. For a moment Kevan thought it might turn on him too. Thought it might drain every Lannister in the room until the lion was extinct. Instead, it turned away. It moved toward the hearth, and the fire guttered as it passed, shrinking as if afraid. The shadow flowed into the darkness beside the chimney and vanished, as if it had never been. Kevan stared at the place it had been, at the empty space that still felt wrong. Around him, men shifted uncertainly, their swords useless, their courage suddenly a small, thin thing. Outside, rain beat against the tower. Harrenhal's great broken stones endured, unmoved, as if death were just another guest it had hosted 1,000 times before. Kevan's hands trembled as he closed Tywin's staring eyes. Then he looked up, and in his expression something hardened. Not Tywin's cold certainty, but a different, desperate resolve. "Send ravens," he ordered, voice rough, "to King's Landing, to Casterly Rock, to every commander. Tell them," he swallowed. The words tasted like ruin. "Tell them Lord Tywin Lannister is dead." The raven reached King's Landing at dusk, its wings slick with rain, its eyes bright with the empty ferocity of a creature that had flown through fear and did not know it. In the Red Keep, candles burned in a warm chamber that pretended the world outside was not starving. Cersei Lannister broke the seal with fingers that had never been forced to hurry for anything she did not choose. She expected news of battles, demands, complaints. She expected the usual. Men dying, money draining, the realm bending under the weight of her family's will. As she read, the color left her face so quickly it was as if someone had poured it out. Tyrion Lannister watched her over the rim of his cup. He had been in too many rooms where one piece of parchment changed everything to mistake that sudden stillness for anything else. "Well?" he asked, voice mild, as if he were asking after the weather. Cersei's lips moved. No sound came. Her eyes flicked up, wide, and Tyrion felt the old, familiar tightening in his gut. Joffrey Baratheon snatched at the letter. "Give it here," he demanded, petulant as a child denied a toy. Cersei slapped his hand away hard enough to make him blink. "No," she snapped, and the word carried a mother's fury and a queen's fear. Joffrey's mouth twisted. "How dare you?" Tyrion rose slowly, setting his cup down with care. "Sister," he said, softer now. "What does it say?" Cersei's throat worked. "It says..." Her voice broke, and that alone was frightening. Cersei's voice did not break. "Cut. It says father is dead," she whispered. The room went very quiet. Even Joffrey seemed to sense the shape of the moment, though he could not understand it. His eyes darted between them, angry and confused. Tyrion's mind raced, leaping from consequence to consequence like a man stepping across stones in a flood. Tywin dead meant power unbalanced. It meant allies reconsidering. It meant fear draining out of men like blood. "How?" Tyrion asked, and hated how thin his voice sounded. Cersei stared at him as if he had struck her. "It does not say," she whispered. "It only says Harrenhal. No wounds, no assassin." Her hand tightened on the parchment until it crumpled. "It must be a lie," she said suddenly louder, as if volume could make it true. "A northern trick. Robb Stark." "It is not Robb Stark's style," Tyrion said, and felt cold settle in his bones. He thought of Stannis Baratheon's hard eyes. He thought of the Red Woman, of rumors in the docks, whispers of shadows. "And it is not Renly Baratheon's." Cersei's gaze snapped to him. "Do not speak his name," she hissed. Joffrey's face flushed. "If grandfather is dead, I am king," he declared, as if death were only a ladder he could climb. "I will have their heads. All of them. I will." Tyrion ignored him. He could already hear the city outside, the way it would change when the news spread. He could see the gold cloak's uncertain eyes. He could feel Varys's invisible smile. He could imagine Littlefi, Inger's calculations spinning like a coin in the air. The candles burned steadily, indifferent. Far from King's Landing, in Storm's End's Great Hall, Renly Baratheon read the same words by torchlight. The stone walls made everything echo. The crackle of flame, the rustle of parchment, the faint intake of breath when he reached the line that mattered. "Tywin Lannister," Renly murmured, and there was something like awe in it. Not admiration, never that, but recognition of a pillar falling. Marjorie Tyrell leaned close, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "If this is true," she said softly, "the game changes." Renly's smile came slowly, not bright as before, but sharp. "It does," he agreed. He looked up at Brienne of Tarth, who stood at his shoulder like a guard carved from oath. "Send riders," he ordered, "to Mace Tyrell, to Randall Tarley, to the Storm Lords. We march." Brienne's eyes widened slightly. "To King's Landing?" "To King's Landing," Renly said, and his voice warmed with ambition. "Before Stannis can claim a victory he cannot hold. Before the Lannisters can find a new spine. Before the realm decides someone else's crown fits better than mine." Marjorie's smile was small, satisfied. "Then we must go quickly," she said. Renly's gaze drifted toward the high windows where the sea's gray light seeped in. "Oh," he said softly, "we will." And on Dragonstone's battlements, Stannis Baratheon stood in the wind like a man weathered into stone. The black sea roared below. His cloak snapped behind him. His face was drawn, his eyes hollowed, but in them a cold fire burned, vindication, grim and merciless. Melisandre of Asshai stood behind him, her red robes whipping in the gale, her ruby bright as a living coal. "The lion is burned," she murmured. Stannis did not turn. He stared out at the water as if he could see Harrenhal's towers across the distance, as if he could see the Shadow's hand closing around a throat. His voice was quiet, almost lost to the wind. "Good," he said. In 3 places at once, under the same storm-swept sky, men and women felt the realm shift beneath their feet. And somewhere in the dark between those places, something unseen moved, hungry for what came next. Tywin Lannister's death did not settle in King's Landing the way ordinary deaths did. It did not arrive with the familiar dull thud of grief and duty. It came like a stone through glass, shattering assumptions, sending shards into every corner of the Red Keep. Tyrion watched the words being read again and again as if repetition might change them. His sister held the parchment like an accusation. Joffrey circled the table with restless anger, snatching at nothing, unable to find a target big enough for his rage. Pycelle's mouth hung open, his beard quivering when he breathed. Peter Baelish looked entertained in a way Tyrion found obscene. Varys looked concerned in the manner of a man who could wear concern like a different robe. "It's a falsehood," Cersei said, voice sharp, desperate. "A ploy. Robb Stark wants us." "Robb Stark is winning with swords," Tyrion said, cutting in before she could build a castle out of denial. "He has no need to win with parchment." "Then it is Stannis," Joffrey spat. "Or Renly. Or both. I'll have their heads." "You will sit," Cersei snapped at her son. Joffrey's face went red with insult. "I am the king." Tyrion looked at him, at the soft mouth and cruel eyes, at the way his hand drifted to his belt as if he had ever held a sword with purpose, and thought, "Tywin is dead, and this is what remains of the lion's pride." He felt the faintest flicker of something like pity, quickly smothered. "Send a rider to Harrenhal," Cersei said. "Send 10. I want confirmation. I want names. You want your father back," Tyrion said quietly. "No rider can bring him." Cersei's eyes flashed. "Mind your tongue. I am trying to save your son's throne," Tyrion replied. "Or what's left of it." Pycelle cleared his throat, a wet, nervous sound. "My lady, perhaps Lord Tywin suffered a seizure." "Or seizure," Cersei whirled on him. "Do you think my father was some soft-bellied merchant who collapses over supper?" Pycelle wilted. "No, my lady, I only—" Varys folded his hands. "There are stories, your grace," he said to Joffrey, though his eyes were on Tyrion as if testing him. "Harrenhal is an old place, a cursed place, some say. Curses are for crones," Joffrey snarled. "And yet," Littlefinger drawled, "even crones sometimes guess the weather." Tyrion felt his patience thinning. "Enough," he said. The word hung in the air, heavy with a confidence he did not entirely feel. He had learned from his father that authority was a posture. If you did not wear it, someone else would. He turned to Varys. "What do you know?" Varys's smile was apologetic. "Only what my little birds bring," he said. "Ravens flew from Harrenhal in haste. Men there are frightened. They whisper that Lord Tywin died without a wound." "Poison," Pycelle blurted, grasping at something he could understand. "A tasteless poison, perhaps. The tears of Lys." Tyrion's mind leapt to the docks, to shadows and whispers, to Stannis Baratheon and His red woman. He had laughed at the tales once, called them sailors' nonsense. He did not feel like laughing now. "We cannot afford panic," Tyrion said, more to himself than to them. "If the city panics, we lose before a single enemy sets foot in the mud." Cersei's fingers tightened around the parchment until it tore. "What do you propose, clever little brother?" "I propose we act as if it is true," Tyrion said, and watched her flinch at the honesty. "We reinforce the gates. We pay the gold cloaks. We ration grain with discipline, not cruelty. We keep Joffrey out of sight when he's in a mood to hang bakers for sport." Joffrey's eyes went wide with outrage. "You dare?" Tyrion leaned forward, meeting the boy's glare with a calm he had to carve out of fear. "Your grandfather is dead," he said softly. "The only thing holding this city together now is the illusion that the Lannisters remain strong. If you tear at that illusion, even your crown will not keep your head from the mob." Silence. Even Cersei seemed to pause, as if the word mob conjured an image she could not deny. Outside the windows, rain slid down glass in slow, miserable trails. Tyrion listened to it and imagined it washing away blood from cobbles that had not yet been stained. "All of this," Littlefinger said lazily, "because one old lion stopped roaring." Tyrion's gaze cut to him. "And because everyone who relied on the roar is about to learn what silence costs," he said. Cersei did not mourn in public. In public, she did not mourn at all. She stormed from the small council chamber as if she could leave the news behind in its stale air. Tyrion followed at a careful distance, counting her steps the way one counted a drunk's, watching for the moment balance failed and something shattered. In her solar, she shut the doors hard enough to rattle the hinges. Lion tapestries stared down from the walls, their woven eyes proud and blind. A fire burned in the hearth, too low, too smoky, as if even flame had been diminished by the day's message. Cersei snatched up a goblet and drank, too fast, too deep, then hurled it at the fireplace. It shattered against stone, wine spraying like blood across the ash. "Dead?" she said, and her voice cracked on the word as if it were a blade that had turned in her hand. "My father is dead." Tyrion stood where he was, keeping his hands visible, open, unthreatening. He had seen Cersei in rages before. He had seen her in triumph. He had not seen her like this, raw, stripped of certainty, a queen without her foundation. "You should sit," he said. "Do not speak to me as if I am some fainting girl," Cersei hissed. Her eyes were bright, but the tears did not fall. They hovered like a threat. "You are not," Tyrion said. "You are the regent, which means the realm will look to you now. And to me, and to Joffrey." At the name, she flinched the smallest movement. "Joffrey is king," she snapped. "He will do what must be done." Tyrion glanced toward the curtain, where he had seen a small shadow retreat. Tommen hiding as he always did when voices rose. A child with a gentle heart trapped in a house that rewarded cruelty. "And what must be done?" Tyrion asked. Cersei turned on him with sudden venom. "We must crush them," she said. "Renly, Stannis, Robb Stark, all of them. We must remind the realm what happens when it forgets who rules." "With what army?" Tyrion asked, letting the question cut. "Father's army is in the Riverlands. His commanders will be arguing over who inherits his authority. His bannermen will be frightened. The Tyrells are with Renly. The Stormlords are with Renly. Stannis has ships, and we have..." He looked around the solar, at the rich furniture, the thick rugs, the illusion of comfort. "We have walls and a city full of hungry mouths." Cersei's lips curled. "You think you're clever," she said. "You always have." "I think you're frightened," Tyrion replied. Her hand flew up as if to strike him. It stopped inches from his face, trembling. For a heartbeat they stood like that, her palm raised, his eyes steady. Then she lowered her hand slowly, as if it weighed 100 pounds. "I will not be frightened," she whispered, and the words sounded like an oath she did not trust. Tyrion softened his voice, because he knew how close she was to breaking. "Father kept this family together," he said. "He made men fear us. Without him, fear will leak away unless we replace it with something else." "What?" she demanded, and now her grief showed in the desperation of the question. "What else is there?" Tyrion thought of Tywin's cold, relentless order. He thought of the way his father could silence a room simply by entering it. Tyrion did not have that. Cersei did not have that. Joffrey had only cruelty, and cruelty without discipline was just chaos. "Competence," Tyrion said finally. "Food, payment, the appearance of control, and time. We need time." Cersei laughed, bitter and ugly. "Time," she spat. "Renly will be at our gates within the fortnight if he marches hard. Stannis will come by sea. And you speak to me of time." Tyrion stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then we make them bleed for every day," he said. "We do what father would have done if he were here. Prepare." Cersei's gaze searched his face, as if looking for the lie. "And if you fail?" she asked. Tyrion held her eyes. "Then your son dies," he said simply. "And you die with him, and our house becomes a cautionary tale for singers." Silence fell. In it, the crackle of the hearth sounded like bones snapping. From behind the curtain, a small sound, Tommen's breath catching, made Tyrion's chest tighten. Cersei turned away, pressing her hands to the mantel as if the stone could hold her up. "Get out," she whispered, voice breaking at last. "Get out before I remember you are my brother and not my enemy." Tyrion hesitated. Then he left, because sometimes survival meant choosing which battles to fight now and which to postpone until the knives were sharper. Night in the Red Keep had teeth. It bit with drafts that crept through stone and the distant roar of the city. Thousands of voices contained by walls that had never truly held anyone. Tyrion walked quickly, the echoes of his steps following him like an accusation. Varys glided beside him, soft as silk, his hands folded, his expression sympathetic in the way a man's expression could be when sympathy cost him nothing. "The news is spreading," Varys said gently. "How?" Tyrion demanded. Varys' smile was apologetic. "Ravens do not only fly to castles," he said. "They fly to men with friends and friends with enemies and enemies with loose tongues. A message is like perfume. One drop and soon the whole room smells of it." Tyrion rubbed the bridge of his nose. "What are they saying?" "That Lord Tywin Lannister is dead," Varys replied. "That the lion has been slain. That the gods have finally remembered Harrenhal's curses. That a shadow took him." Tyrion stopped so abruptly that Varys had to pause too. "A shadow?" Tyrion repeated, tasting the word. Varys' eyes were round and earnest. "Stories," he said. "Wild stories. People need magic when the world makes no sense. It is simpler to believe a monster crawled from a ruin than to believe a man can die without warning." Tyrion stared down the corridor, seeing in his mind the sailors' whispers he had mocked. Stannis Baratheon's red woman with her ruby. A shadow that killed a king's brother in the old tales. He had not believed. He had wanted not to believe. There was a difference. "Have your little birds heard anything specific?" Tyrion asked carefully. "Names, details." Varys' smile flickered. "Some say Tywin Lannister choked," he said. "Some say his guards could not touch what killed him. Some say Lord Kevan Lannister is sending for every banner he can still command." "And Renly?" Tyrion asked. "Renly Baratheon is very popular," Varys said, as if that explained everything. "Popular men do not wait for opportunity. Opportunity waits for them. His host is enormous, and his banners are bright enough to blind." "Stannis," Tyrion pressed. Varys spread his hands. "Stannis Baratheon is less popular," he said, and there was faint humor in it. "But he is stubborn, and he has ships. He has faith." They passed a pair of gold cloaks standing near a window slit. One stared out at the city below, his face pale in torchlight. The distant shouts rose and fell like surf. Tyrion could not make out words, only the tone. Restless, hungry, angry. Tyrion glanced down a side passage and caught, for a heartbeat, a strange greenish glow pulsing from below, like swamp fire. The smell reached him a moment later. Sharp, oily, unnatural. Wildfire. "The Alchemists Guild is working," Tyrion said. Varys nodded. "They say you have given them purpose," he murmured. "Purpose?" Tyrion echoed and almost laughed. "Yes, give men fire and they call it purpose." They reached a balcony that looked out over the Blackwater. In the darkness, the river was a strip of ink reflecting scattered lights. Tyrion stared at it and imagined ships, Stannis' ships, dark sails like wings. He imagined Renly's army winding down the King's Road, green and gold like a snake of flowers strangling stone. "You were right," Tyrion said quietly. Varys tilted his head. "About what, my lord?" "Fear leaks away," Tyrion said. "Father was the plug. Now the leak becomes a flood." Varys's expression softened. "Then we must build boats," he said, and it was such a gentle metaphor that it made Tyrion's stomach twist. "Tell me," Tyrion said, voice low, "if Stannis truly has a shadow that kills, do my walls matter?" Varys looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above the hiss of torches. "Walls matter," he said, "until they do not." At Harrenhal, dawn was a rumor. Light seeped through broken stone in thin, reluctant ribbons, as if even the sun feared the place. Kevan Lannister had not slept. He sat in a chair that felt too small for his grief and stared at his brother's body. Tywin lay on a table beneath a crimson cloak, his face pale and composed, as if death had been an inconvenience he intended to correct. Someone had tried to smooth his hair. Someone had tried to fold his hands. Nothing could make him look alive. Around the hall, men kept their distance. Lannister soldiers who would have charged a screaming line of spears stood now with their eyes fixed anywhere but on the dead lord, as if looking too long might invite whatever had done it. "It was poison," one knight insisted, voice strained. "It must have been. Poison leaves marks," another snapped. "Black lips, swelling, cramps. There was nothing." "A curse?" a third whispered, and then crossed himself quickly, ashamed of his own superstition. Ser Adam Marbrand stood near Kevan, jaw tight, eyes hard. "Whispers will rot us," he muttered. "We must move." Kevan's hands were steady on the table edge. He had always been the steadier brother, the one who followed while Tywin led. Now steadiness was not choice but necessity, because if he broke, the whole army would break with him. "A maester examined him," Kevan said, voice raw from repeated orders. "He found no wound, no sign of poison." "No," he swallowed. The word he did not want to say lodged like a thorn. "No cause." "That does not mean there is none," Marbrand replied harshly. Kevan lifted his gaze to the men around him. "Listen," he said, and the command cut through the murmurs because it carried Tywin's echo. "Whatever took my brother, it does not change our immediate problem. Our immediate problem is that the war just lost its master," someone said bitterly. "Our immediate problem," Kevan corrected, "is that King's Landing will be attacked." That got their attention. Fear shifted from superstition to strategy, something men could at least pretend to control. "Renly Baratheon is near Storm's End," Marbrand said, "and Stannis has ships, and Robb Stark sits in the west with Jaime Lannister." Another knight added, spitting the name like a curse. Kevan nodded once. "Which is why we do not scatter," he said. "We do not descend into squabbling like frays over a wedding feast. We hold together. We send ravens. We send orders." A maester stepped forward with parchment and ink, eyes wide and sleepless. "To whom, my lord?" Kevan looked down at Tywin's face, at the man who had commanded the realm through sheer will. Then he looked up, forcing himself into the shape of authority. "To King's Landing," he said. "To Queen Regent Cersei Lannister and to Tyrion Lannister, if he still holds the hand's chain. Tell them the truth. Lord Tywin Lannister is dead. Tell them I take command of the host in his name." He turned his head slightly. "To Casterly Rock. My niece must know, and the rock must be prepared. To every bannerman who still fears the lion enough to answer the call." The maester's quill scratched. Kevan's voice hardened. "And to the twins," he added. "Walder Frey is a rat who likes to smell which way the wind blows. Tell him the lion's claws are still sharp." A murmur ran through the hall. Marbrand leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And Harrenhal?" he asked. "We cannot stay here. Men are already speaking of shadows." Kevan's eyes flicked to the high, broken rafters, where darkness pooled. He remembered the shape in the chamber, the cold that had filled the air, the helplessness of steel. "We leave," Kevan said. "We take what we can. We march west, slowly, cautiously, until we know which enemy reaches King's Landing first. We may still be able to—" His throat tightened. "We may still be able to arrive in time." Marbrand hesitated. "Without Lord Tywin." "Without him," Kevan finished, and the admission tasted like dust. "We do what we have always done. We obey the need of the house." He stood, and the chair scraped stone, loud as thunder. Men flinched. Kevan's grief did not vanish, but he forced it inward, where it could burn without being seen. He reached out and pulled the crimson cloak tighter over Tywin's body, covering the face, because even a lion deserved not to be stared at by frightened men. Then he turned to his soldiers and said, "Move." Storm's End had always felt like a clenched fist of stone, even when the halls were filled with laughter. Now, with Tywin Lannister dead and the realm tilting, Renly Baratheon's laughter became a sharper thing. Less carefree, more certain. He stood at the table, fingers spread on the map as if he could hold the kingdom still. Mace Tyrell leaned over the board, heavy as a feast table himself, eyes bright with opportunity. Randyll Tarly stood like a disapproving statue, as if he would rather be anywhere else than listening to a young king's delight. Loras Tyrell paced, unable to stay still, as if war were a horse he wanted to mount immediately. Renly tapped the parchment with one finger. "So," he said, "the lion is dead. Gods be good." Mace Tyrell boomed, and slapped the table hard enough to make the candles tremble. "Without Tywin Lannister, those incestuous wretches have no one to hold them upright." Randyll Tarly's mouth tightened. "Do not celebrate too loudly," he said. "A cornered beast still bites." Renly glanced at him, amused. "You always sound like you're scolding someone, Lord Tarly." "I am," Tarly replied without blinking. "I am scolding the realm for being foolish enough to fall into chaos." Marjorie Tyrell's fingers rested lightly on Renly's sleeve, grounding him. "It is an opening," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were keen. "Openings close. We must move before they do." Loras stopped pacing long enough to lean forward, eyes bright. "We march now," he said. "We take King's Landing while they scramble." Renly smiled at him, softer than he smiled at anyone else. "Yes," he said. "We march." Brienne of Tarth stood behind Renly, watching all of them with solemn intensity. Renly's war council could be a performance, but Brienne took it as sacred. Every decision here meant men would die. She remembered that in a way the others did not. "How quickly can we move?" Renly asked. Randyll Tarly answered before Mace could start boasting. "Fast enough," he said, "if you keep your host disciplined. If you stop letting knights race each other down the King's Road as if it were a tourney." Mace Tyrell harumphed. "My knights! Your knights will do as they are told." Renly cut in, still smiling. "Or they will find themselves cleaning latrines." Loras's mouth twitched, amused despite himself. Brienne saw it and felt a fierce, foolish warmth in her chest. Renly turned his gaze to the arched windows, where the wind moaned beyond the thick glass. "The question," he said, "is not whether King's Landing will fall. It will. The question is who arrives first, my roses or my brother's ships." Marjorie's eyes narrowed. "Stannis Baratheon will come," she said, "and he will claim the city in your name if he can. He will call you traitor if he cannot." Renly's smile faded. "Stannis," he murmured, and the name sounded like old frustration. "He will not claim anything in my name." Brienne stepped forward a fraction. "He is dangerous," she said bluntly. Renly glanced back at her and smiled again, as if her seriousness amused him. "He is my brother," he said. "He is a man who thinks duty is all that matters. If he had ever understood people, he might have been loved." Randyll Tarly's eyes flicked to Brienne, then away, as if the subject of love in war was distasteful. Renly's hand returned to the map, tracing the King's Road north. "We will move at first light," he said. "The Storm Lords will join us. The reach will come up behind. We will feed the small folk on the road, pay for what we take. I will not arrive in King's Landing as a raider. I will arrive as a savior." Mace Tyrell beamed as if Renly had praised him personally. "Splendid," he said. "Splendid. The people will adore you." "They already do," Renly said lightly, and then his gaze sharpened. "One more thing. Edric Storm." The room shifted. Even Loras looked uncertain. Renly's voice softened slightly. "Send him away," he said. "To Greenstone, to my mother's kin. House Estermont will keep him safe." Marjorie's grip tightened on his sleeve, just enough to warn him. "Safe from what?" she asked. Renly looked at the raven parchment again, at the line that had mentioned no wound, no assassin. "Safe from the kind of war that uses boys as fuel," he said, and the bitterness in his tone surprised Brienne. "Safe from my brother's priestess." Brienne's heart thudded. She had heard the stories in camp, whispered over dice. A woman in red with a jewel that glowed, a king who listened too closely to fire. "I will choose men to escort him," Renly said. Brienne spoke before she could stop herself. "I will go," she said. Renly turned, eyebrow lifting. "You," he said almost gently. "And who will guard me?" "I swore," Brienne began, throat tight. "You swore to keep me safe," Renly finished, "which you will do by staying close." Brienne bowed her head, swallowing her disappointment like a stone. Renly's hand squeezed Marjorie's briefly, and then he straightened, the king again. "We march," he said, and the words were not a plan but a verdict. Catelyn Stark left Storm's End with the taste of salt on her lips and unease in her bones. Renly had offered her courtesies, warm food, a dry chamber, polite words, but behind every courtesy was the unspoken truth. He wanted her son's submission as much as he wanted the Iron Throne. He would dress it in smiles, but it was still a demand. They had spoken in the Great Hall after the War Council, alone enough for honesty to slip through the cracks. "You should tell Robb to bend the knee," Renly had said, as if offering advice to a young knight before his first joust. "I will make him Warden of the North. I will confirm his rights. He can keep his titles, his lands, his pride. All he must do is accept that there can be only one king." "And what of the justice my son seeks?" Catelyn had asked. "What of Eddard Stark's blood?" Renly's eyes had flickered brief impatience, quickly masked. "I will punish those responsible," he had said smoothly. "In time, when I sit the throne." Catelyn had thought of time. Time was the word every southern lord loved, as if it were a coin they could spend without limit. In the north, time was winter. It was not something you wasted. "You ask him to bend now," she had said, "and promise justice later." Renly's smile had returned, bright as ever. "I promise what is possible," he had said. "The realm needs unity. Your son is brave, but he is young. He is winning battles, yes, but the Iron Throne is not won in the Riverlands. It is won in King's Landing." Catelyn had studied him then and felt the sharp edge under his charm. Renly was not merely a pretty brother wearing a crown for sport. He believed in himself with the absolute confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone he respected. He believed the realm would follow him because he was the sort of king people wanted to look at. "You will fight Stannis," she had said. Renly's smile had cooled. "If I must," he had replied, "but I would rather he understood sense." "He does not," Catelyn had said, and thought of Melisandre's ruby pulsing like a heartbeat that did not belong to any living thing. Thought of Stannis's hollowed eyes. Now she rode along the road that led away from Storm's End and toward the Riverlands, toward her son. The wind tugged at her cloak. Her escort kept tight around her, men with Stark sigils and River Lords' banners, cautious in a land where every hill could hide raiders. Behind her, she could hear Renly's host assembling, the distant clank of armor, the calls of men forming columns. The green and gold banners rose and dipped like waves. Thousands of men moving north, confident and hungry for victory. Ahead, the road stretched into mist. Catelyn's horses' hoofs thudded on damp earth, steady as a heartbeat. She looked up at the gray sky and felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Tywin Lannister was dead. Renly Baratheon was marching. Stannis Baratheon had chosen a path that smelled of smoke and shadow. And Robb, her son, St. Stood in the Riverlands with a crown of his own, surrounded by men who had declared him king because they could not imagine bowing again. He was brave and stubborn and so young. Catelyn pressed her gloved hand to the direwolf clasp at her throat and whispered, too softly for her men to hear, "Gods, keep him." The wind did not answer. It only carried the distant sound of marching, growing louder as the realm began to move. Stannis' strength returned in pieces, like a shattered thing that had to be gathered up by hand. On the morning after the casting, he could not climb the steps to the map room without pausing, knuckles white on the stone railing. His face had the waxy pallor of a man pulled from cold water. Davos stayed close, ready to catch him, and hated the helplessness of that readiness. Melisandre did not stay close out of concern. She stayed close as a shadow stayed close to a body, because it belonged there. In the map room, Stannis leaned over the carved table, one hand braced, the other hovering above the Blackwater like a hawk over prey. The painted rivers looked too bright, too clean. The realm onward did not smell of rot or fear. It did not reflect the cost of killing a lion with darkness. Salladhor Saan lounged near the door, all bright silks and rings, his grin too quick. He looked at Stannis the way a merchant looked at a ship he was not sure would stay afloat. "My friend," Salladhor said, and the words dripped charm. "You look like you have been kissed by a corpse." Stannis' eyes narrowed. "Speak of ships," he snapped. "Not my face." Salladhor raised both hands. "As you command," he said. "Ships. You have ships, yes. You have men, yes. You have a woman who makes men fearful, yes." His gaze flicked to Melisandre's ruby and then away, too quickly. "And now you have a dead lion. The sea brings many gifts." Stannis ignored him and spoke to Davos instead. "How many can we sail within 3 days?" Davos swallowed. "If the weather holds, your grace, most," he said. "But some of the storm lords still hesitate. They followed Renly. They may. They will come when they see I do not waste time," Stannis said. "They will come when they see the false king's support crack." Melisandre's voice slid into the space between them. "The lion's death will shake them," she murmured. "Fear will seek a new master." Davos's stomach tightened. "Or it will seek to flee," he said, and could not keep the bitterness from his tone. "Men who feel hunted do not always run toward a king." Stannis' gaze cut to him, hard. "You doubt me? I doubt." Davos began, then faltered, searching for a way to speak truth without losing his tongue. "I doubt the cost," he managed. "You look like a corpse," Salladhor supplied cheerfully. Stannis' lips curled in disgust. "I look like a king who has done what needed doing," he said. Melisandre's ruby pulsed. "The fire took from you," she said softly. "It always takes, but it also gives." Davos looked at her. "What does it give?" he asked, and his voice was raw with anger he did not fully understand. Melisandre's eyes met his, serene. "Victory," she said. "A realm purified." Davos wanted to spit. He wanted to drag Stannis away from her and lock the door against red silk and whispers. But Stannis' hand hovered above King's Landing, and Davos knew the truth. His king did not listen to Melisandre because she bewitched him. He listened because she told him what he wanted to hear, what his duty demanded. "We sail on the next tide," Stannis said. "We take the city before Renly's pretty banners choke the road." Salladhor's grin widened. "Ah," he said, "now that is a plan I can love. Quick, dangerous, profitable." Stannis' eyes did not soften. "If you betray me," he said coldly, "I will hang you from your own mast." Salladhor laughed, as if threatened by a man like Stannis was a kind of compliment. "You always make me feel cherished," he said. Davos watched them and felt the map room's air grow heavy. Outside, the sea roared against Dragonstone's rocks. The sound had always been Stannis's companion. Now it sounded like a warning. Stannis straightened slowly, wincing, and for a moment his posture faltered. Davos saw the weakness and felt a surge of fear, but Stannis's eyes remained hard. "Send letters," he ordered Davos. "To every lord who followed Renly. Pardon if they come now. Fire and death if they do not." Davos opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. He bowed his head. "As you command," he said, and wondered if the pardons were meant for those lords, or for Stannis himself. Tyrion went below the Red Keep because it was easier to breathe among fire that admitted it was deadly than among courtiers who pretended they were not. The passageways beneath King's Landing were a maze of damp stone and old secrets. The air down there tasted of mold and smoke and something sharper, something that made the back of Tyrion's throat tighten. Bronn walked beside him with a torch and an amused expression, as if escorting the hand of the king into madness was simply another paid errand. Haelene the pyromancer waited in the vault, his eyes shining with an unnatural, childlike glee. Around him, jars were stacked in neat rows, clay pots sealed with wax and marked with strange symbols. In the dim light, they looked harmless, like stored honey. Then the green glow flickered between them, faint and hungry, and Tyrion remembered. Wildfire was not honey. It was a living thing that wanted to burn. "My lord Hand," Haelene said, bowing too deeply, as if his bones were made of wax. "You honor us." "I honor no one who keeps this much death in jars," Tyrion muttered. Haelene smiled. "Death is only another form of change," he said dreamily. "The substance yearns to transform, to purify." Tyrion's skin crawled at the word purify. He thought of Melisandre and her talk of fire and righteousness. He wondered if all men who loved flame ended up speaking the same way. "How much?" Tyrion asked. Haelene spread his hands, delighted. "More than you requested," he said. "Far more. The guild has been inspired. The king's enemies gather. The old magic returns. We feel it. The wildfire responds." Bronn snorted. "Aye," he said. "It responds to coin." Haelene's smile did not falter. "Coin is a kind of magic," he said. Tyrion stepped closer to the jars, lantern held out. The green light swam under the wax seals like trapped swamp fire. It made his eyes water. "If Stannis's fleet comes," Tyrion said, "we will need enough to break it." "We have enough to break the river," Haelene replied proudly. Tyrion looked at him. "Do not break the river," he said sharply. "Do you understand me? This city sits on it." Haelene blinked, as if Tyrion had spoken nonsense. "But the substance. The substance does not rule here," Tyrion snapped. "Ido." Bronn's smile widened, as if enjoying the rare sight of Tyrion bullying someone who deserved it. Tyrion turned away from the jars and pointed with his lantern. "You will deliver a portion to the riverfront," he ordered. "Discreetly, in small wagons. If one jar breaks in the streets, the city burns before the enemy even arrives." Haelene bowed again. "As you wish," he murmured. "As the fire wishes." Tyrion's jaw clenched. He hated the way they all spoke of fire as if it had a will. But perhaps it did. Perhaps he had always lived in a world where men believed in wills larger than their own. Gods, crowns, gold, and wildfire was simply another. As they walked back through the damp corridors, Tyrion's thoughts churned. Tywin's death meant no army would thunder in at the last moment to save them. If King's Landing was saved, it would be saved by Tyrion's preparations, by soldiers who barely tolerated him, by gold cloaks who might sell their loyalty for a loaf of bread, by jars of green death. He glanced at Bronn. "If the city falls," Tyrion said quietly, "what will you do?" Bronn shrugged. "Depends who wins," he said. "If it's Stannis Baratheon, he'll cut off heads for sport. If it's Renly Baratheon, he'll pardon half the city and throw a feast for the rest. Either way, I'll want to be on the winning side." "And if there is no winning side?" Tyrion asked. Bronn's grin faded slightly. "Then I'll want to be far away from here," he said. Tyrion did not answer. He could not be far away. Not now. not with the hands chain heavy on his neck and a boy king above who thought death was a game. Behind them, in the vault, the green glow pulsed softly, patient as hunger. Riverrun felt warmer than Storm's End, though the riverlands were no kinder. The river's damp clung to everything, but the castle's heart beat with northern voices and the murmur of men who had been blooded together. Catelyn arrived at dusk, travel-stained, her cloak spattered with mud. When she stepped into the great hall, conversations faltered as men turned. She saw relief in some faces, suspicion in others. Lords had begun to look at her differently since she had come back from Renly's camp once already, begun to wonder whose cause she served, her sons, her father's houses, or her own desperate hope for peace. Robb Stark rose from the high seat the moment he saw her. He was taller than when she had last stood before him, his face leaner, his eyes harder. The crown he wore was simple, iron-shaped into direwolf heads, yet it changed him. Not by making him grand, but by making every choice he made heavier. "Mother," he said, and crossed the hall to her with a speed that betrayed the boy still inside the king. Catelyn held him tightly for one heartbeat, letting herself feel the warmth of him, the reassurance that he lived. Then she stepped back and studied his face, searching for cracks. "I have news," she said. "We all do," Great John Umber boomed, waving a raven scroll like a banner. His laugh filled the hall, big and rough. "The old lion's dead, dead and buried in a ruin. The gods have teeth after all." Men shouted approval. Cups slammed on tables. Somewhere a horn sounded, as if victory could be summoned by noise. Edmure Tully looked less joyful. He stood beside Brienne Tully, the blackfish, whose expression was carved from caution. "It is good news," Edmure said, as if convincing himself. "But it may not end the war." "It changes it," Brienne said, voice dry, "and change cuts both ways." Robb's gaze remained fixed on Catelyn. "You were with Renly," he said. "Did you hear this there?" "I heard it there," Catelyn replied, "and I saw what it will do." She took the scroll Great John thrust toward her and read quickly. "Harrenhal, Nogund, Lord Kevan taking command." The lines were blunt, military. They did not mention the chill in a room, the way fear could seep into men's bones. Robb exhaled slowly. "If Tywin is dead," he said, "Jaime becomes more valuable." "Or less," Brienne cut in. "If the lion's head is gone, the body may thrash blindly." Great John snorted. "Then we cut off more heads." "Quiet," Robb said, not loudly, but with a weight that stilled the room. Great John grinned and shut his mouth, though his eyes still gleamed. Robb turned back to Catelyn. "Tell me," he said, and there was an edge to his voice. "How did Tywin die?" Catelyn hesitated. She saw men leaning in, hungry for any weapon, even one they did not understand. She saw the blackfish's narrowed eyes, already wary of anything that smelled like southern sorcery. "I do not know," she said carefully, "but there are rumors." "Rumors?" Robb pressed. Catelyn met his gaze. "Stannis Baratheon has a priestess with him," she said. "A woman from Ashai. Men say she works with fire and shadows. I saw her. I saw her ruby glow as if it had a heartbeat. And I saw Stannis choose something in that tent that frightened me." The hall quieted. Even Greatjon's grin faded a fraction. Edmure swallowed. "Sorcery?" he murmured, and looked as if the word tasted foul. Bryndon's expression did not change, but his fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "Sorcery or not, the Lannisters will blame someone," he said, "and fear makes men stupid." Robb stared at the parchment, then at his mother. "Renly marches," he said, more statement than question. "Yes," Catelyn replied. "He will march on King's Landing at once. He believes the city will open its gates to him." "And Stannis?" Robb asked. Catelyn thought of Dragonstone's cold stone, of Stannis's hollow eyes. "Stannis will not be outpaced," she said. "He will come too." Robb's jaw tightened. "Then King's Landing will bleed," he said. "And while they bleed, we must decide what we are." Catelyn's heart clenched. "You are my son," she said softly, because sometimes that was the only truth she could bear. Robb's gaze softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again beneath the crown. "And I am king in the north," he said, and the hall murmured in agreement, as if the words were a spell. Catelyn looked at the men around him, men ready to fight, ready to die, ready to follow. She wondered how many of them would survive the storms coming from the south. Tyrion climbed the battlements because the sky felt less suffocating than the rooms below. The wind off the Blackwater was cold and damp, but it cleared the stink of politics from his nostrils. Down in the city, lanterns flickered in narrow streets. The sound of King's Landing rose up in a steady murmur. Voices, dogs, the distant clang of metal. The city did not know what waited beyond the dark river. Or perhaps it did, and that was why it never truly slept. Bronn leaned on the parapet, cloak pulled tight. "You're fond of dramatic views," he remarked. Tyrion stared downriver. "I'm fond of knowing where the next knife comes from," he said. Below, near the river gate, the Great Chain's mechanism had been disguised as construction and repair, but Tyrion knew its shape now. Iron teeth waiting to bite into ships. Men would cheer when it rose. They would not think about how many would drown against it. A faint greenish reflection trembled on the water, subtle enough that anyone who did not know to look might think it moonlight. Tyrion knew better. Covered barges waited along the banks, loaded with wildfire jars like eggs that would hatch into flame. Footsteps approached, soft, almost soundless. Tyrion did not turn until the scent of perfume reached him. Varys appeared like a worry-given flesh, his round face solemn. "My Lord Hand," he said. "I have news." Tyrion's stomach tightened. "If you tell me my father rose from the dead and wants his chair back, I might almost be relieved," he said. Varys offered a small, sad smile and held out a parchment sealed with wax. "From the Stormlands," he said. "Renly Baratheon has left Storm's End. His host marches north along the King's Road." Tyrion took the letter and read quickly. The words were blunt, filled with numbers and names, the kind of report Varys's little birds excelled at. Too many men, too much confidence. "How long?" Tyrion asked. Varys's voice was soft. "If he marches hard, perhaps 2 weeks," he said. "Less, if the roads are kind and the gods are cruel." "And Stannis?" Tyrion asked, though he already knew the answer would be worse. Varys produced a second parchment. "Dragonstone stirs," he said. "Ships are being gathered. The Celsail Salador San is seen in Stannis Baratheon's councils. The Storm Lords are being pressed to return to their lawful king." Tyrion stared at the river again. "2 stags," he murmured. "One by land, one by sea." Bronn scratched his jaw. "Which one do we pray for?" he asked. "The pretty one or the grim one?" Tyrion's laugh came out thin. "We don't pray," he said. "We prepare." He folded the letters and tucked them into his sleeve. Below, the city's lights shimmered, fragile as candle flames. Tyrion imagined them going out one by one as siege tightened, as bread ran out, as fear turned into riot. He thought of Tywin again, of the way his father would have looked at this situation, measured it, moved pieces like a man playing Cyvasse with human lives. Tywin would have found a way to make someone else pay the cost. Tyrion had no one else. He turned toward the stair that led down into the keep. "Double the watch," he told Bronn, "at the gates and at the docks. If a single ship slips past our eyes, it will be inside the river before we can blink." Bronn nodded, no longer smiling. Varys hovered, as if reluctant to leave Tyrion alone with the night. "My lord," he said softly, "there is one more thing." Tyrion paused. "Of course there is," he said. Varys's eyes were gentle, and that gentleness frightened Tyrion more than any grin. "The small folk are already whispering," he said. "They say Tywin Lannister's death was no mortal thing. They say the gods have sent a shadow to punish lions. And when people believe the gods have chosen sides," he let the thought hang. "They stop fearing men," Tyrion finished. Varys bowed his head. "Yes," he murmured. Tyrion looked out over the Blackwater one last time, listening to distant thunder roll in from the sea. Somewhere beyond that darkness, Stannis Baratheon's ships were being readied. Somewhere on the King's Road, Renly Baratheon's banners were moving like a bright tide. And here, in the heart of the realm, a dwarf with a chain around his neck stood between a city and the fire that would devour it. Tyrion pulled his cloak tighter, not against the cold, but against the sudden certainty that the realm had entered a kind of war it no longer understood.